We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.
Like Vasquez said in Aliens, let's rock. If you're new to the tribe, we got Rich behind the mix, Rad is across the table, and my name is Yanni Baumeister. We are Unity Gym, experts at turning driven people into athletes. This episode is brought to you by the Unified Movement System, the online program that balances strength, flexibility, and fitness so you can unleash your inner athlete. Get daily coaching by us, plus our epic gym and home workout programs. As a valued listener, use the link in the description to get your first month free. Before we get started, big warm welcome. If you are watching on our YouTube channel, remember to hit that like button to support the channel and subscribe if you like what you see. The more likes, the more people get to see this fantastic content. I'm excited to announce that joining us today, we have Phil White from ADPT Physio and Tony Boutagy from tonyboutagy.com. How are you guys?
Great. I'm very excited to have Tony here with us. How are you, Tony?
I'm really well. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, really well. Excited for this show. I'm going to give Tony a little bit of an intro here. Tony started working in the fitness industry in 1995, first as a personal trainer and sports coach, and then moved into roles that included education, academia, and strength coaching. So these days, Tony splits his time evenly between coaching one-on-one in the gym and running educational courses on many topics to do with training, program design, and body composition. He holds a PhD in sports science and has written more than 65,000 training programs and coached elite athletes in around 30 different sports. Now, for Yanni and me, our introduction to you, Tony, I can't remember if it was 2004 or 2005, but you were the programming coach for our Cert 4 in personal training at the AIF. Is that right, Tony? Am I remembering that right?
That certainly rings a bell. We're dating back now 15, 16 years, but yeah. In the early 2000s, I was one of the lecturers for Certificate 3 and 4 and Diploma, which at that time was, I think, Australian Fitness Network, and then in time became AIF.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. And one of my first memories of you was when we were, remember at the Australian Institute of Fitness there, they had that little gym, where we did the practical stuff. And they invited us to come and do a workout before the lectures if we wanted to. And Yanni and one of the guys from our course were doing a workout. And Yanni was right into bodybuilding back then, and he had his gym gloves on. And I remember sitting there and doing a little bit of training with him. And as you walked in, you said to Yanni, nice gloves, Yanni. And Yanni said, oh, yeah, thanks, Tony. They're really good. And you said, do they come in pink? And Yanni turned red like a beetroot. And needless to say, that was the last day that Yanni ever wore gloves in a gym.
The last day I ever wore gym gloves. I remember it clearly.
I had a patronizing sense of humor in my younger years, that's for sure.
Well, it worked because we now no longer allow gloves in our gym, and people get named and shamed when they wear them as well. So.
Your patronizing attitude is carried forth into the future.
Now, listen, for anybody that wants to know a little bit more, over the years, I have Yanni and myself and Richard have all done several of Tony's BFI, Boutagy Fitness Institute courses. I've personally done BFI level 1 twice, BFI level 2, I think twice, and BFI level 3. We did that one, BFI level 3 is always a little bit different to my understanding, Tony. And the one that I remember doing was with Professor John Hawley and Louise Burke. Mm-hmm. That was a really good one. And I needless to say, the education that we've all had from you has really shaped the unified movement system that we teach at Unity Gym. It really has. It's been a cornerstone of the programming principles and programming design that we use throughout our business. And anybody that's interested, make sure you go and check out tonyboutagy.com. But over the years and over the courses, I went from debating my opinion with you to just shutting up, because I really learned very quickly that I could never win a debate because you'd actually read all the research and I was loosely quoting some conversation that I'd had with someone on Facebook, and you used to always go, Oh, well, Rad, we actually know from this study. And
I love going to a Tony Boutagy workshop or course, and there's always one new Rad in the group that thinks that they can argue and debate at a high level, and you just get absolutely flogged.
It's always an enjoyable experience.
but in a very, very nice way.
Yeah.
Tony's not like Charles Pollock
Very
used
polite,
to be, where he
very
just make you feel like crap.
He always, I can hear it because he said it to me so many times. He never says, Rad, you're wrong. He always says, well, Rad, what we actually know from this and that study is this. And you just get very politely put in your place. So that's my experience over the years with Tony. And fortunately, we have people like you, Tony, who are objective with the information that you're giving out and are willing to share it with the world in a great medium like this, with the podcast. So,
well, thank you, guys. It's a real honor, and somebody like me, I guess we all have our thing and our gifts, and going through academia is one thing, but I'm a coach at heart. So I read the science, and then I try and apply that to my clients and to the students to make sure that what is done in science actually has practice and application for our clientele.
Yeah, awesome.
I love that.
Well, what we've done, we've got some really great topics that our tribe around the world have asked for us to cover in our podcast. So, Yanni, what are we going to be talking about today?
This is the 2021 Unity Gym Tribe Q&A podcast series. I couldn't think of a more creative name, so that's what we're going with. And this first question comes in from Blakely Harnage, who is actually one of our administrators and our admins from the UMS Online Coaching Group and the UMS Movement Mastermind. So I thought I'd put one of Blakely's questions first. Blakely has asked, is cell autophagy via fasting pathways really best? He mentions here that Lane Norton suggests autophagy is a result of caloric restriction and that fasting is overrated, or the fasting pathways are overrated. So this is kind of a double-edged question, but it's a great one. I'm so stoked that before we came on, I sent all the questions to Tony and said, highlight the ones you'd like to talk about the most. And when I saw this one highlighted, I was like, Josh, I did a little air punch because Tony's got a lot of insight. And you're a bit of at least I remember, a proponent of fasting. That's definitely who I learnt and was put on to intermittent fasting and time restricted eating regimes from. I probably have learnt the most from you, or at least been sent in the direction down that rabbit hole after hearing it from yourself. So I'm interested to see whether you're still a proponent of it, and because I still fast. I do time restricted eating and one 24-hour fast every week, and it makes me feel pretty good. It sort of suits my lifestyle. I'd love to hear what you guys. I know Phil's had a bit of a dabble with time restricted eating.
Yep, had quite a lot of experience with it, but have recently stopped doing it since doing half Ironman training, and it's been just an interesting sort of when you get on a certain thing where you think it's all like time restricted eating's the best in all situations, and then you change your situation and realize that maybe there's times when it's more appropriate than others. So yeah, it's been a good practical lesson in when it's.
So what about you, Tony? Are you still practicing time restricted eating or intermittent fasting?
Yeah, not really. And Phil hit the nail on the head. It's always context driven and goal specific. If you are doing an endurance sport, and I'm an endurance guy myself, we find it hard enough just to eat enough food to stay in energy balance, because every session can be 1,000 to 3,000 calories in expenditure. And so you can be severely in the hole when it comes to energy output versus intake. And then you can't recover, and then you can't train, so it has a knock-on effect. So the question about intermittent fasting or fasting, time-restricted eating and autophagy, it's always goal-specific. It's really useful to understand what autophagy is and what we know about it, especially in humans. So autophagy is just simply a cellular pathway by which we turn over damaged cells and replace them with healthy cells. And it is happening all the time. But with advancements in scientific techniques, researchers can take samples of muscle and look at the rate of cellular turnover or autophagy. And in the early studies, this was done in rodents and in animals where you could sacrifice the animal and have a look at the kidney and have a look at the spleen and the heart and so forth. In humans, we can't do that. So we tend to look at muscles, and it always depends what research interest to what they find. So I have friends who do muscle autophagy, and they're really interested in the effect of either mitochondria, so the powerhouse of the cell and its relationship to health and endurance activities, or myofibrillar, or just pure muscle autophagy and its relationship to muscle health and muscle growth. And it always depends what you're after. And in the early studies on autophagy, it showed that you could actually upregulate this process of getting rid of damaged cells, replace it with healthy cells very quickly with fasting. But as human studies have now come out, it appears that the time difference that you see in a rodent study versus a human study is markedly different. So for a classic 12 to 24 hour fast for a mouse, there's probably 3 days to a week of fasting for a human. So the change that we're seeing in autophagy, or the upregulation in autophagy in humans with fasting, or at least time-restricted eating, is probably not significant. Now, when you compare that to studies that have done an exercise session, one session of exercise upregulates autophagy in the mitochondria, mitophagy, and upregulation of autophagy in skeletal muscle. So exercise is a very potent tool for getting what we want, getting rid of damaged cells and replacing them with healthy ones. So it always depends on what you're after. So I'm more in the camp of using exercise to promote health of our muscle system, as opposed to using fasting. I have one final point on that, and that is, as we age, keeping our muscle and keeping our strength becomes paramount. And given that we can't store the protein that we eat, we need to eat it regularly to turn on growth pathways. It doesn't make sense to me, if you're over the age of 40 to 50, to having long periods of time where you're not exposing the muscle to protein. That just doesn't make sense from a potential health benefit, whereas you definitely get the health benefits when you exercise. So I wouldn't use fasting or prolonged time-restricted eating if you're over the age of 45, 50. I think muscle strength, muscle mass is your primary goal. If you're in your 20s, then that could be something you could consider, but I really don't see anything too magical when you compare it to what one session of exercise does.
Interesting. Is the benefits of autophagy and exercise, because something that I'm asked a lot, and people sort of debate, is there any health markers that would sort of slow it down? I know that I think it may have even been an article that you wrote saying that there seems to be an absence of autophagy when you're not exercising at all. My question is, if you're, say, really overweight and what one would perceive as unhealthy, if you exercise, do you still get those benefits? Or is there any time when the body is, sort of out of in poor health that would prevent it from occurring?
Well, autophagy is occurring in all systems of the body at all times. What fasting or time-restricted eating, let's just call it fasting, is promoted to do for autophagy is that it can spend your energy and your physiological systems to health and repair. So it is happening all the time. Bones turning over, muscles turning over, organs are turning over. It's happening 24/7. So what fasting does is it stops the influx of energy, and then your body then shifts and ramps up, because it's now got the energy to do so and the attention to do so, to this cellular repair process. Research shows that those people who are physically fit and regular exercises, when they stop eating, actually upplay autophagy better. So any way that you look at it, autophagy is upregulated to a higher degree in those people who are physically fit and those people who exercise. Now, the question that you ask is, if you are untrained, unfit, overweight, and potentially have metabolic disorders, would you get benefit from time-restricted eating and so forth? Now, from time-restricted eating for autophagy, probably not. It just takes too many days of fasting to actually see what we see in the animal studies. If you were to add exercise and time-restricted eating, would we see benefit? In autophagy, again, probably not. In other metabolic pathways, definitely. So I think we're sometimes a little bit too focused on autophagy as the be-all and end-all, when health is there's so many different related fields. And don't forget that one session of exercise will upregulate your ability to metabolize glucose, to use fat as a fuel source, lower blood pressure, so on and so forth. It talks to so many different disciplines. So that's why I think it's an exercise first as an option for health, as opposed to not having food and then hoping that autophagy is upregulated.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are your thoughts on the use of time-restricted eating for other sort of health benefit, metabolic benefits, like metabolic flexibility, for instance, things like that? Mm-hmm. Do you think that it has a place there, or would you say that just undulating between high carbohydrate and low fat and low carbohydrate, high fat, vice versa days would have the same effect?
Yeah. So metabolic flexibility refers to our ability as humans to switch the fuels that we use for metabolism. So when we have a meal and that meal has carbohydrates, the body can efficiently burn, use, and store the carbohydrate as glycogen in the liver and muscle. And then in between meals, then go quickly back to using fat as a substrate for use. Now, it's been demonstrated with those people who are overweight, who've got metabolic disorders like metabolic syndrome, that they can't burn carbohydrate efficiently. So insulin goes sky high. And then in between meals, they can't burn fat efficiently as well. And there's some very elegant studies that have looked at elite cyclists versus fit cyclists versus those people who've got metabolic syndrome. And the metabolic syndrome folk can't burn carbs well, can't burn fat well, and partition their energy all incorrectly. So that's really interesting data that we should be trying to promote metabolic flexibility. And there are a number of proposals for how we can best do that. And time-restricted eating is one of these. And that is, we have an eating window of about 8 hours, and then we have a fasting period of about 16 hours. And that idea is that during the eating period, your body is exposed to carbohydrates, and we have to use those efficiently. And then in the 16-hour fast, then the body is then pushed to burn fat as a fuel source. There are now dozens of studies that have looked at time-restricted eating with humans, because all the early studies, again, came from animals. The health benefits versus normal exposure to food seem to be minor, not as magical as it appears in the animal studies. So we need to be careful what studies that we're looking for when we're basing our conclusions. Again, when you add an exercise stimulus, of which there's only a handful of studies that have used weight training as an exercise stimulus. From last count, there's only 4 studies out of all the studies that have been done on time-restricted eating actually had an anabolic stimulus of weight training. Shows that it'll either have a neutral effect on muscle or maybe a slight beneficial effect. And that could just be due to the amount of protein that was consumed. So time-restricted eating by itself is a great strategy for those people who find themselves overeating and exposed to food all the time and eat first thing in the morning and last thing at night before they go to bed, and potentially struggle with that after dinner period where they have more alcohol and have desserts and then something before they go to bed. Now, in that respect, time-restricted eating is compressing that eating window so that you have less access to food. Now, that's a good thing. But as we just said before to Phil, if you're now a trained athlete, it doesn't make sense to compress that eating window, because you want to eat to refuel for your next training session so you can have an effective week and then an effective block of training. So we have to distinguish between who the advice is applicable to and what are the pluses and downsides versus those people who are very physically active. So I don't think time-restricted eating is a good option for those people who are physically trained or athletes. I think it's most appropriate to those people who are overweight, have metabolic disorders, or have an issue with overeating at various times of the day.
Yeah, I was going to say the behavioral side, the kind of psychology side of it, I think is one that's really interesting, where there are certain people who are so good at living in the gray area of doing, eating a little bit often and all of that. But I know that for myself, even though I'm very committed to training and I know kind of a lot of what to do, I still find that I find it hard to turn the off switch off if I'm, if I start eating, and then I'll often kind of overeat on kind of days that I'm, not training as much. So I find for me personally, that either black or white, you're eating or not eating, was very helpful for me when I was like wanting to lose a bit of weight and I wasn't training nearly as much. But for other people, like I know, Rad, you're such a disciplined person. When you put your mind to something, you're so good at like having a bit and then putting it away and then having it more. So I think that kind of personalization kind of comes down to the exercise, but also like what works for the human as an emotional brain as well. So that's as not a nutritionist, I don't know, from personal experience, that's what I've found.
What I've found, my personal experience, and I've learned so much from just listening to Tony talk there. I love asking Tony questions like this because not only to hear the opinion from somebody who is as well read as you are, Tony, but just somebody who I trust, which is awesome. So I'm going to have to absorb a lot of that. But for me personally, my experience with time-restricted eating was that it was very, very powerful in untethering my need for food all the time. And because I am somebody that generally, most of the time, I train a lot more than the average person. Most months out of the year, I would train 5 or 6 days a week, 1 or 2 times a day for anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 hours per training session. And that's not, people hear that and they think, oh my God, that's insane. A lot of that might be just really light movement training, but it is movement, it is burning calories. And, but I don't do that all the time. Like anybody, I think I have periods of time where maybe I don't train for a week or sometimes 2 weeks if there's a lot going on in my life. And what time-restricted eating has done for me that's been really beneficial is that I can very quickly switch from eating, 3,000 calories a day or 4,000 calories a day down to, 1,500 calories a day or 2,500 calories a day. So that because if I don't, at my age now at 43, I do notice that I start to feel it a little bit more around my waistline. So it's been good for me for that. But yeah, that's been awesome. It's been really insightful to hear your opinion on autophagy and time-restricted eating and fasting, Tony.
I've got one more question on this topic. It's a slight segue from the original question, but it's certainly related. Is to get your stance on, or what you've seen most recently. I went very deep down the rabbit hole of Dr. Sachin Panda's research on this when he was doing a lot of the research on animals. I think like 2016, 17, 18. It was years ago. And sort of the idea, his ideas around circadian rhythm and the fact that your gut bacteria and your digestive enzymes were diurnal and reactive to the light and food and xenobiotics and things like that. And his sort of conclusions that we should be, consuming our calories through food and drink during the period of time that was best suited to the digestive system. What's your take on that? And does that has that been sort of debunked, or is it still worth following? So the concept of
certainly
diurnal, circadian health.
Yeah, Sachin Panda certainly shifted his research attention from animals and pure time-restricted eating to looking at circadian biology, because they're all part of the same sentence and understanding. And there's no debunking of that at all. And it actually is supported by the time-restricted eating studies that have compared eating earlier in the day compared to eating later in the day. And the results are always better when we shift our exposure to food to the periods of time where we're most active. So in the earlier hours of the day or around the training time. And that's why the data is always better for early time-restricted eating as opposed to later. So for many people, time-restricted eating is skipping breakfast and having a big lunch and an even bigger dinner and then going straight to bed. And that was never how it was envisaged, and it's certainly not where the data shows the benefits of time-restricted eating. And that is, you have a bigger breakfast and then a smaller lunch and then a really early but very small dinner. And that coincides with the periods of time where our metabolism is most active, with the light and dark cycles. And many of the hormones, insulin in particular, it antagonizes our sleeping hormone melatonin. So we want food in our system and insulin to be low at night so melatonin can be high, so we have great sleep architecture. So Yanni, there's a lot to say for shifting the calories earlier in the day. So we could call that early time restricted eating, or we could just say try and eat more of your food earlier in the day. But it really is the same topic.
Yeah, I actually, my recent personal experimentation has shifted to what you just said there, Tony. Funnily enough, after I watched a video from a Buddhist monk in Thailand where he was talking about a morning routine that Buddhist monks use. And the part that I really took home from it was when he said that for us, our morning routine starts the night before when we have a very, very small meal for dinner, and it's never later than 5 p.m. Often it's at about 3 p.m. And the reason why they do that is just that it gives them a better sleep. And of course, it just made sense straight away when I heard that. And I shifted from the example that you gave before, where my time restricted eating was no breakfast, big lunch, bigger dinner. And I was getting shocking sleep like that. And I did feel, certain benefits, being more alert during the morning, whatever anecdotal, feelings I was getting from it. But when I started playing around with eating no later than somewhere between 3 and 5 p.m. and a smaller meal, immediate better sleep. Immediately, my sleep quality was improved, and I enjoyed having a big breakfast again just before I went and used all the energy.
Yeah, and the data really supports that for sleep quality and sleep architecture. And it takes us back to that earlier point about metabolic flexibility. When you wake up in the morning after having a small dinner hours before bed, your body is now predisposed to fat metabolism. So if you did 20, 40, 60 minutes of some low intensity cardio, then you are massively upregulating your fat enzymes in muscle and those fat transporters, and you become very efficient at using fat as a substrate. And then you eat and you break that fast, and then the body is exposed to carbohydrates. When you lift weights or do intervals or something later in the day, then you're teaching your body to use carbohydrate as a substrate, and you get all of those enzyme pathways in the muscle. And so you get the best of both worlds. And that's why I think metabolic flexibility, it's an exercise term. It's not a fasting term. So if you exercise in both states, before breakfast, after breakfast, and you do exercise that suits the substrate, so low intensity, steady state work for fat metabolism, and then high intensity weight training or interval training, which is all carb dependent pathways, then you will become metabolically flexible, and you'll do so with all of the health benefits as opposed to maybe getting it by time restricted eating or fasting.
Just quickly before we do wrap this conversation up, I think it'd be worthwhile just talking a bit about what goes wrong if you do get into that imbalance of energy in versus energy out, because there's it's something that people have probably heard of before with the female athlete triad in the past, which was the idea that basically with a likelihood of osteoporosis long-term, amenorrhea, so period stopping, and eating disorders. But it's kind of more recently started to be expanded to involve men as well, because there's some real issues with both men and women having this. And the term REDS or RED-S is this idea of relative energy deficiency syndrome. I think it's just important to highlight, like, there is, it can be like a short-term thing. You're gonna be really hungry and your training is going to suffer. But if you do kind of push through this and really get into a state of not getting your energy input and energy output in balance, then that can have long-term effects for overall health, which is absolutely. That's probably a bigger discussion to go into all of kind of REDS, but I just wanted to point out that it is more than just you're going to be hungry for a couple of days. There's some real detrimental health outcomes.
That's something that I've looked at and has interested me. I mentioned this the other day. I'm heavily into mixed martial arts, and they're seeing a massive increase in bone fractures in the men who are cutting weight a lot and having to drop that are moving around different weight divisions. So it's really punishing on the body's metabolism and obviously creating deficiencies that I think are going to go a lot deeper than what look just sort of superficially like just a collision fracture or something like that. They're all ending up with hollow bones. But that's going to open up a huge conversation.
Well, let's wrap that one up. That was a great talk, Tony, and it was really good to have you on the podcast and to connect again and just have a have a chat. So thanks so much for coming on the show, Tony.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're absolutely welcome. We look forward to having you again in the future. So for those listening who'd like to connect with Tony, Tony can be found on Twitter at Tony Boutagy, TonyBoutagy. For interesting articles he's read, or you can check him out on Instagram at Tony Boutagy for more training related information. And remember, if you want to step up your game, especially if you're a fitness coach, you can enroll in any of Tony's courses at tonyboutagy.com. And Yanni, Richard, and I could not recommend them highly enough. They have been game changers for us. And if you're a serious coach and you want to up your game, highly recommend.
One thing I want to add on that, which I really haven't seen much in the industry, because I've been back to do your the same course a number of times. And the best thing about Tony's courses is he updates the information constantly so that you can go 1 year from the next. And if the research has changed, like what we've discussed just now, he will have updated the course curriculum. And that's rare, because a lot of people invest a lot of time and front load the course curriculum, and then it stays the same for a decade. And I think that that's really important to acknowledge, because you can go back and do the level 1, level 2, level 3. And I know you've broken it up a lot since we did the courses last, Tony, and you're doing more niche topics and all sorts of really great stuff. But even just the program design courses, the fat loss and hypertrophy courses, they're updating constantly, and that's what I love about it. So definitely check him out, tonyboutagy.com, and we'll have you back on the show soon.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
And
Awesome.
we're out. Awesome.
We're out. How long was that?
That was 30 something minutes.
Yeah, that's good. Perfect.
That was great, Tony. Unreal. Would you want to have a minute or two break before we go into the next topic, or are you ready to roll?
No, I'm good, guys.
Yeah.
I'm good.
So what's our next topic?
This
Yanni
next one
or
I
Tony,
think is
that
going to
you
be
wanna
the funnest to discuss.
How does exercise affect your sex drive and libido?
And libido, yeah.
You know, that's a great one. And it's easy to tie in Red S with that topic, because exercise has an effect on skeletal muscle, which transiently increases testosterone. But over the long term, if you're in energy deficit, then your testosterone drops and your sex drive drops. So it would be worth discussing both of those in that context of energy deficiency or balance in exercise.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.